Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to everyone online as well. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. It's lovely to have you all here. This is our first in-person or hybrid event for the Colloquium. We've had our first Colloquium already, which took place exclusively online. So it's really wonderful to welcome you all back into the honours room for our Colloquium talk, but also very much pleased with this amazing turnout this afternoon. So we host the Colloquium on Mondays between 1 and 2 in the slots, as you can see today. Please feel free for all of you who are here this afternoon to join our talks in the future too. This is a wonderful atmosphere, and welcome to everyone online. Thanks for being here this afternoon. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome this afternoon Professor Janice Francis, who I know many of you in the room know really, really well, and we as a staff know know Professor Francis well too. And he's obviously a scholar and activist whose work engages with the questions related to gender, sexuality and schooling. And Professor Francis has his research that focuses on how educational structures, the discourse, the practices, all reproduce cisheteronormativity and social inequality in schools, and how these issues are resisted and challenged. So Professor Francis has published extensively in the fields of gender, sexuality and education, and Professor Francis has also been the recipient of many awards, teaching and research awards, as well as the South African Education Research Association and the Distinguished Teacher Award here at Stellenbosch University, which are amazing achievements. So Professor Francis, without further ado, we would love to hear your presentation this afternoon, and I'm going to share it now. And if the people online can just indicate whether they see it. Would you like it enlarged or just as it is? Okay. Perfect. So to those online, are you able to see clearly the screen? Okay. I'm not hearing any voices from online, but hopefully all is okay. So thanks.
So great. Good afternoon, everyone in the room, and good afternoon, people online. I'm going to go straight into the paper. I am going to read the script because I want to be precise about a couple of things. So if you wouldn't mind, I will look up every now and then. I'm going to be sharing some data with you, and what I'm sharing with you is some parts of my last book. And come on in, great. And so, I'm going to start here. So the scene is Durban, South Africa. Durban, a port city, is the third most populous city after Johannesburg and Cape Town. It symbolizes the expression of its colonial history, with remnants of apartheid's racial segregation and cultural patriarchy. Sprawling along the coast with expansive field of sugarcane, forest thickets and endless ravines, one could characterize it as a city of segregated living, commerce and leisure. High-rise buildings, luxurious mansions, security-patrolled suburbs to keep others out, and townships corralled by mushrooming squatter camps make up this metropolis. Its colonial and separatist character, however, tells more. Durban is the city where Gugu Dlamini was stoned to death after she disclosed her HIV seropositive status. home and school of Fezekile Kwezi, who accused President Jacob Zuma of rape, igniting a national debate about rape culture in South Africa, and where Linda Gushle Chele, a well-known activist, was brutally slain in a homophobic attack. These violent incidents are some of the most notable, leaving countless gender and sexual violence stories untold. I don't want to let the reference to how disproportionately, ordinarily, it has become for Black bodies as sites of violence and harmful effects slip. These disturbingly familiar and violent acts are some of the most notable, leaving countless racial, gender, and sexual violence stories untold. To say Durban is post-colonial, post-apartheid, is a stretch like its uneven coastline. Durban's notoriety sets the scene for Coastal School, a co-educational school located in a greater Durban township. It is 14th of February, Valentine's Day. The time, 2:15. Like all days in February in Durban, it is typically hot and humid. Learners sit in a group in a crowded classroom. It is life orientation class, and group work seems to be the customary pedagogical choice. The learners hold onto a sheet, and the sonorous lulls in their voice, interspersed with giggles and whispers, suggest the discussion is on sexuality. Some gesticulate their points of views, others look tired and bored. The class is getting close to the end. What examples of safe sex practices have you discussed in your group? The teacher, too tired to stand, asks. After moments of awkward silence, a light figure in the front of the class indicates to answer by raising their hand. Before they answer, the teacher pointedly halts any discussion. Outraged and with a mocking tone, the teacher questions them. Becca, why are you braiding your hair and wearing makeup? Stunned by the teacher's outrage, Becca is silent. Reading their silence as obstinance, the teacher yells at the whole class, trying hard to invoke their outrage at Becca. I cannot teach a gay student, just leave my class. At that moment, at the end of the class is signaled, and all the learners rush out of the class to the cafeteria. Baker, still reeling from the implosion of the teacher's homophobia, slowly makes their way to the cafeteria. Numb to the piercing stares of the other students, teachers, and cleaners, Baker sits down and reflects on the incident, noting that they've been the target of the teacher's mockery for the last year. As they reach into their pocket to put an end to their buzzing phone, the same teacher walks in, this time more incensed. She shoots the first question. Do you have a vagina or a penis? Sensing the enragement, a crowd of teachers, learners, and cleaners gather around like a chorus in a great tragedy, although not inquiring, but complicit. She continues to taunt them. Why are you like this? The problem is that you don't know how to use your penis. For Baker, looking up was not imaginable, unthinkable. Tears, unthinkable. What killed me inside is that she said all of this in front of other people. The homophobic tirade now shifts from its intended target and spills onto the growing and captivated audience, softening a tone, almost appealing for the support of the onlookers. She pronounces, it is such a pity, because he would make such a handsome boyfriend. And then just as before she exits the cafeteria as a disciplinary instrument, crushing any support for pro-LGBTIQ sentiment, she adds, you must leave this homosexuality thing because you're not born like this. Murmurs and hushed whispers fill the room as the PJ Powers and Steve Kakana song, Feel So Strong, playing on the cafeteria stereo, dwindles in the background. Not feeling so strong. Baker has reached breaking point. I've had it. I've been patient with the name calling and the insults. This time it broke me. Baker informs the guardian at home and reports the matter to the learner representative council, but nothing is done. What might this harrowing scene have to do with studying cisheteronormativity, schooling, and activism? I've opened this talk with Baker's story as an entry point for providing insights into the schooling experience of queer and trans school attending youth in South Africa. I've rewritten this incident somewhat unconventionally, framed with empathy and at least awareness of Baker's discomfort, rather than was reported in the national newspapers. The reports have treated Baker's experiences impersonally and in parts with tones of sensational ridicule. A closer reading of the article suggests that the incident is more than another example of homophobia in South African schools. Note, for example, how the teacher categorizes Baker's sexuality rather than their gender expression. Gender identity or expression and sexuality are not the same thing. Interestingly, the teacher's comment that Baker doesn't know how to use their penis links them to the social, cultural expectations of cisheteronormativity, of being a heterosexual, cisgender man. I use cisheteronormativity throughout my work, my book, and the talk today and elsewhere, because it extends the more commonly used heteronormativity, which describes the oppressive, pervasive orientation and organization of society around compulsory heteronormative heterosexuality, which excludes those who are sexually counternormative to cisheteronormativity. The structural forces of cisheteronormativity, as an undisputed and taken for granted idea, organize the ideological, institutional, and everyday interactive and relational context that position LGBTIQ people as abnormal and unnatural. A school with a cisheteronormative culture is one whereby curriculum, educational policies, and schools normalize and privilege cisgender and heterosexuality. It is a hierarchical system. In a nutshell, cisheteronormativity is a central cultural regulatory device that authorizes homophobia and transphobia. Baker's story is another example of the local media and many schools' uncertainty about which label to use to make sense of an individual who does not fit in with the normative views of sex, gender, and sexuality. Using the details provided in the article, we know that Baker is described in terms of their gender expression, clothing, haircut, behavior, voice, body characteristics, and according to teacher, their sexuality, being gay. But we're not altogether sure. Therefore, based on the evidence provided in the article, Baker could very well much identify as a trans woman, or non-binary, or perhaps straight, or bisexual, or even questioning. Cisgenderism, which refers to the cultural and systemic ideology that denies and denigrates self-identified gender identities that do not align with the assigned gender at birth. So Baker's story is not an isolated incident, but a snapshot of countless similar reports that appeared in the South African press. At the time of conceptualizing my book and finalizing the book, a 17-year-old learner committed suicide after a headmaster called him a pervert and told him that he looked gay. In the same week, a school in Durban expelled 2 girls for kissing each other. A deputy principal of a school in Tembisa suspended 7 lesbian learners, alleging that their desire to wear trousers instead of skirts was satanic. A couple of months ago, you'd have read about a grade 9 learner, Tira Malusi, from PJ Simelane Secondary School in Soweto, who committed suicide after a teacher mocked him over his sexuality in front of the whole class. So Baker's story, together with these instances of heterosexism, cisgenderism in schools, highlight, despite the progressive constitutional gains of inclusive and equal education, the social realities faced by South African schools attending queer and trans youth are serious. So, motivated by an interest in the specific questions of sexual orientation, I drew on the work of Ahmed. Ahmed offers an account of how bodies are orientated through the ways in which they take up space. Throwing light on the concept of orientation in sexual orientation, Ahmed explains how we perceive our social worlds in relation to the proximity between bodies and objects through action, and what the effects are when bodies are directed to particular spaces. So let me break this down a little bit. Ahmed argues that bodies are shaped by what they tend toward. And that repetition of that tending toward produces certain tendencies. Okay, I'll break it down a little bit more. For Ahmed, orientations are about the directions we take that put some things and not others within our reach. Importantly, it is the repetition of gestures which gives bodies their disposition of tendencies. Ahmed crystallizes how power operates as a mode of directionality in schools. That to become straight means that we have to turn towards objects that are given to us through compulsory heterosexuality, and turn away from objects that take us off the straight line. My deliberate and intentional use of portrait instead of landscape, oblique and monochrome images in this presentation, for example, force you not to see, read, or be straight, but to reorientate yourself, an oblique slant, if you like, to bend or to get within proximity, a queering, if you like, to force you to deviate from the straight line. So the presentation will proceed in this way, and hopefully by the end, you'll all be wonky and queer. To be orientated, therefore, is to follow the line. So think about schools which straighten. I drew an Ahmed's phenomenological project to think about how cisheteronormativity in schooling serve as a straightening device, ensuring that schools are orientated around the straight body, explaining sexuality as something we enact by desiring and becoming pulled towards other bodies. Social institutions such as schools make it seem like queer and trans subject positions are not within reach. As a result, school spaces become straight, enabling straight bodies to extend into them. So think about which bodies can truly extend in this university space. So which bodies cohere and which bodies can extend and which bodies can't. So objects do not refer to physical objects, but also practices, pedagogy, sport, social events, and award ceremonies. So let me give you an example of the University of Stellenbosch University. We have a straight curriculum. Our curriculum is white, it's Afrikaans, it's Christian, and it's straight. So if we have a module, to disrupt that, I teach a module at this university called How to Do Queer. Now, we could have called that module anything. We could have called that module How to Be Brown and Muslim, or How to Be a Person with Disability, to challenge the normativity that straightens you. Okay. So repetitive performance of hegemony. So let me give you another example of an object. It's very likely that most of you would have gone through a whole undergraduate program not being taught by an African woman, the largest demographic of this country. Notice how bodies become straightened and certain objects are put in line with you and some bodies are not put in line with you or deliberately not put in line with you. To illustrate this, think about schools, think about the heteronormative practices performed through the metric dances. When we describe institutions such as schools as straight spaces, we draw attention to how orientations are about directions we take to put some things and not others within our reach. So think about how these matric dances become a happy destination, a happy heterosexual destination, right? Or a cisnormative happy destination. So in the presentation today, I'm going to go with the theory away now, crack into the kind of data of this project, which was a large project over 3 years. It was an ethnography, and the ethnography looked at queer activism in this country. It looked at what did queer and trans activism look like. And so phase one of this project reviewed all the online data that was available to me of trans and queer organizations in the country. I wanted to look particularly what were the educational resources that they did have. So that was phase one. Phase two of the study, I spoke to 9 queer or trans activists in fairly kind of lengthy, long interview discussions. 19 secondary school teachers in Durban, Gauteng, and Cape Town. 4 school managers, only because 4 would speak to me. 31 school attending youth, 18 of this, now you have to see wonky at the moment, 18 queer or trans and 11 straight. So I'm going to discuss 3 themes using Ahmed's kind of queer phenomenology. And I'm going to call these 3 themes to turn away, to be out of view, and then the third one to turn within. Remember, all of these are about orientation, the directionality in which we move. So let's look at this. So I will put data, you're going to read the data. I will just provide a kind of, using Ahmed, an analysis of that data and talk to that. So the first one is by Julie, a 17-year-old white bisexual girl attending a private school in Durban, underscores what happens when one turns away from the straight line given to us by schools, or a compulsory heterosexuality curriculum. So this is very wonky. This is not me. This is the slide that changed. And I want you to pay attention. So I will summarize this. Julie is a 17-year-old girl in a residence in a very high-end private school in Durban. And Julie is talking about being in a friendship with a matric girl, and how everything tells her, and how the school tells her it was an unhealthy friendship, but was just, I've always been friends with older people. Listen to the kinship of this young girl. I've got an older brother who's the same age gap, so it wasn't like hard for me. And they just thought that there was like, they didn't know that at all. And I don't know, I just find it quite ironic because it's all like, we are family here. If you think about our residences and you think how we split people into gender groups, and families don't work in that kind of way, right? In our homes, we don't live like that. So grade 9 is an incident in the boarding carried, when she's in the girls' room and they're both watching a film on an iPad. And somebody walks in, and this person rants at them. She said the exact words of the corrupted corrupt. And then I was sent to bed, and she woke me up the next morning, and she was saying, it's an unhealthy friendship. I've got social problems. I am weird. And it's weird that I need to find help. So then I was sent to the counselor's office. And this is a young 17-year-old girl in a bed, watching a film on an iPad, but has a history where there's suspicions that this is a queer body. I'm sharing other examples here. So Julie's narrative, and it goes on later, listen to the words weird, corrupted, and a social problem. Notice also how Julie's mum's anticipated response followed the school's line. That the problem is Julie, right? Is putting some objects and not others in reach, with the same requirement that Julie gives up the possibility of same-sex attraction. The idea is that Julie's got to understand that she's unhealthy, right? Reflecting on Julie's narrative, I'm struck by the repeated reference to how queer bodies are diverted from each other, which affects how they are positioned in school spaces. The metaphor captures how queer bodies leak into the worlds, a way of orientating a body towards and away from others. The right path and direction in Julie's school context is solidified by the principal, who later says to Julie the following: "You are not allowed on the grade 9th floor. You've got one pathway to your room and to the bathroom, and that's where you can go." Look at the directionality. This is where you can go. That's where you can't. So notice how our schools becomes modes of direction that direct us into normative ways of being. Now, Louise is another example, is an 18-year-old white lesbian learner's decision to come out as a bisexual person and then revert to saying she's straight again, offers insight into the homophobic attitudes. So Louise is coming out, and so Louise first comes out as, well, as bisexual. I want to first check the waters, right? So it comes out as bisexual, but identifies as lesbian. And then one of the friends after the class, you can't be bisexual. The teacher says you can't be bisexual. You must choose one or the other. Also, as bisexuality not becoming an option. And then look at the words. You can't be a bisexual. It's just a phase, but you'll grow out of it. So think about it. That sexuality is something like fashionable. You will move out of it. You will come to your senses and become normative. You will, it's a phase. It's that kind of language, right? And then listen to Louise's friend. I just want to have sex. Oh, and then the other one. Then I was getting this whole vibe from friends that I just want to have sex in my brain. That I just want to have sex with every guy and every girl that I thought to myself. So we're looking at how bisexuality becomes constructed. Again, moving Julie away from the line or sexual choices that they make. And then look at the friend's reaction. Whoa, you gave me such a fright. I'm so pleased you came to your sense. Look how the words of fright and fear fit in. You have something to be afraid of, right? Can you imagine somebody saying, I'm heterosexual. You gave me such a fright. Can you imagine? Right? Such fear, right? And then this is another lovely example of Boosie talking about, this is so much in line with the literature. And then look at the other example of Boosie, an African 17-year-old lesbian attending an ex-Model C school in Gauteng, tells how a teacher instructed them to remove any reference to the LGBTIQ self-acceptance and pride. Pride Week was just before that, but kids could have the, I'm Saved or Christian Arts Festival badges. And they notice how the teacher, I remember a teacher tells me, tell my friend very aggressive, to take off that pride badge, to move off the direction, to move yourself away from those objects that take you off the line, right? Rather wear the Christian joy badge or love. Okay? And notice it's quite Orwellian, right? That everyone's equal. Some are less equal than others, that you can wear your Christian badge, but you can't wear the other badge, right? And then, and of course, Gina just sums this out, this theme to turn away. Gays and lesbians are not something that goes along with the school image. If someone did come out, that teacher and principal would squash it. And now the next one is to be out of view. And often I would ask, teachers at the school, learners who are, sexuality, what other identifications there? And you would get, teacher would say to me, and this teacher says to me very clearly and quite assertively, in this township, there aren't gays or lesbians here. There are those kinds of kids here, at least, while they're not those kinds of kids here while I've been here. So we don't include those sections in the curriculum. We won't include something in the curriculum if it is not necessary from the learners. And I mean, I see some curriculum experts in the room, and just think about this, right? That only if they're queer or trans learners in the schools would that be covered in the curriculum. As though heterosexuals questioning cis-normative kids or cisgender kids wouldn't learn from that their parents might not be counter-normative, or their friends might not be counter, or that sexuality is so fixed that person will be heterosexual for the rest of their life. Can you see the problems with curriculum and teachers who use those kind of arguments, right? Another example to be out of view is look at this headline that appeared in the Sunday Times in not a long time ago, 2019. And don't you love the heading, transgender teens set to become first to join an all-girls government school. Notice how it invisibilizes all the other trans and non-binary young people who are in schools. But this is the first. There's a kind of invisibilizing. To be out of view. They don't exist, right? But I want to show you what a citational thread this can be, because a couple of months later, I interviewed a principal of the school, and this is what he said to me. I was talking about bathrooms, etc. And he was saying, we're talking about 1 or 2 learners. Notice the discourse of what is put out in the media. Notice how it's reflected in this person's response. We're talking about 1 or 2 learners, and I'm not sure schools need to go into the frenzy mode. We are aware of 1 transgender learner. Get it? And not to make hasty decisions about bathrooms because we have 1 learner in the Western Cape. See the citational thread, right? And see how socially real that becomes and remains. To be out of view, this is quite a harrowing presentation. I came across this particular textbook when I was in Gauteng at a township school. And the instruction for that class, when I arrived, she was so excited to meet me. She said, oh, you'll be so happy with me because I've got a perfect lesson for you. And I was kind of hopeful. This is wonderful to see some pedagogical interactions. And this was in a textbook, or this is in a textbook. The reference is right at the bottom here. It's a harrowing text in a textbook. And the instruction from the teacher is, this is a role play. So not only is this epistemic violence in the way that it's in kind of intellectual culture, can you imagine reenacting that constantly as a way of reinforcing that queer or trans are not options. They're not objects or in line that one follows. And if you do, these are the consequences. This is in a textbook. Via Africa Life Orientation, grade 10 learners textbook. So to be out of view is to be punitive, that if you do go out of view, this is what will happen. Okay. Indeed, such visibility becomes one way to attribute blame, fuel ignorance, and deepen stereotypes about people with LGBTIQ. When queer learners are represented or visible, they are done so in a context of violence and stigmatization to maintain a gender and sexuality within the boundaries of culturally heteronormative roles. Not only does this position queer young people as out of line and in need of correction, but also justifies them as being targets of bullying, violence, and rape. Now, the last theme, and this is the last lap, is theme number 3. Ahmed doesn't talk about this, but I talk about, okay, what are the options then if all these objects are moved out of queer and trans young people? Where's the other turning point? Where's the other direction? And so this is my 3rd theme where I say, then our only option is to turn within. And here I want to share with you 2 narratives, one from Lwando and the other from Jeffrey. Being out of line for queer and gender diverse is a state of disorientation. In this regard, Ahmed asked an important question as to what effects such encounters have on bodies of others who become transformed into objects of hate. In what follows, I unpack what it means to be out of line or disorientated. My analysis of the participants' storylines show how emotions and feelings, mostly negative, stick to queer youth and mark them as outside the standards of normativity and deserving of anger, disgust, and shame. Not only do these forms of personal, institutional, and societal discrimination and marginalization make queer and trans youth vulnerable targets of marginalization in education, it also translates into how they internalize the oppression. In the following account by Lwando, a 17-year-old gay boy in a township in Cape Town, recalls how worthless he felt during physical education class. And I wonder how many of you have a similar narrative, who's, when choosing these lines, and how emphasis is played on athletic and normative bodies as opposed to queer or trans bodies. And then the last piece by Jeffrey, I fear their harsh words. I'll let you read that. When I asked Jeffrey whether he reported these incidents to anyone, he responded, "Who would believe me?" Me. And goes on in Afrikaans, and my Afrikaans is verskriklik, so I'm not even going to try there. Because me, I'm just a moffie. Jeffrey's response suggests how unremarkable LGBTIQ learners' presence are in schools. Their status minimized, or what they have to say would be disbelieved. Lwando and Jeffrey's narrative opens up how trans and queer young people internalize hegemonic discourses of gender, sexualities, and schooling, that heterosexuality and the cisgender body are somewhat natural and appropriate. Perhaps unsurprisingly, that many of the queer and gender diverse participants, that was a deliberate hegemonic move, talk about feelings not fitting in, not belonging, or feeling invisible. As Makara, an 18-year-old African trans man learner, describes to me in an interview session, it's like being a square peg in a round hole. So let me bring my presentation, because I love the discussion around this. And so to conclude, I presented 3 themes that direct queer trans bodies to turn away, to be out of view, and then to turn within. Of course, these have huge implications for curriculum, policy, teacher education, queer and trans social movements, and I'm happy to pick that up in the question and answer session. And there I want to stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for amazing talk. It's really thought-provoking and also really touching. I've realized how I can't just go back to where. All right. So I'd like to give this opportunity for any comments or questions to Professor Masses on his talk this afternoon, online as well. I can't see that there are any hands raised or comments yet. But any questions or comments from the audience? Yes.
Just maybe another stupid question. When you were relating, I was thinking to myself, isn't what these teachers are doing quite literally illegal? The fact that they are discriminating against students, picking on them because of their sexuality and gender identity, isn't it illegal in our country to do those things, or is it just circular rather than not acknowledged?
Do you want me to take? I can take a couple of questions, and then we can do, if that's okay with you. Yeah. So I will note that, and I will talk about it. Yes. Who are you, by the way?
My name is Noah.
Noah. Welcome. Good to meet you.
So I'm Anthea's friend. I have a follow-up from that. I'm struck by the type experience outwardly. I think we all think that we know what's going on there, but I'd like you to say more to us about how you make sense of what's going on in that particular position.
Yes.
So I have one question. Good morning. So we discussed 3 ways kind of that schools operate as a straight line. And the first 2 make very much sense in the context of heteronormativity. But the third one is trying to end because that focuses on the subjectivity of the person themselves. We only kind of discussed it in the neighborhood context of how one internalizes the hatred projected onto the body. But what I want to know is, we believe that turning in can be a constructive, positive experience beyond just the internalization.
you want to just tell everyone your name?
Hello, I'm Ed.
Okay. Okay. Shall I go with those three? Shall I go with those three questions? Yeah. Noah, thank you. You know, when you're doing this kind of research, so often you are in a classroom, and where some of these fairly oppressive and sometimes quite harsh things are happening in the room in front of you. And those of you who do educational ethnography know about it. So you always have this dilemma as the researcher and the ethnographer. What does one do with that? But you know, you used the word illegal at the moment, and I don't know if you're aware of it. As we sit and as we do here, the minister has come up with the draft guidelines for gender and sexuality. How are you aware of those gender and sexuality? So the gender and sexuality guidelines, these are the draft policy, are meant to address issues like, what does it mean to be gender diverse in school? What does it mean to be queer in school? And so you've got this amazing constitutional framework, which you're absolutely right, it's unconstitutional. And so you have this wonderful constitution, one of the first country in the world, South Africa, and then one of only 6 countries in the world in the constitution have that reflected. Then you have things like the School Act, etc. So I'm going to answer the question on a legislative level. So we do have the most amazing legislation around marriage, adoption. Interestingly, when it comes to schools, the micro policy is so you've got this macro policy that talks about marriage, constitutions, policies that anti-discrimination, the workplace, etc. When you come to the school policies, now I can guarantee you, because I've done this work, there's not a single policy that uses the word gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. So when you're talking to teachers will ask you very strongly, what is the policy about this? And where is it? So the first piece of policy that comes to engage with this very directly is the guidelines. But you do realize the guidelines have been in the system for almost 2 years. But the objection to the guidelines persists. I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago, a psychiatrist was on one of these guidelines talking about conversion therapy as an option. So this is right now happening right now. So this is the kind of conversations that we're having. This is at the draft, the policy guidelines. Same time, the objections from the Christian right around the guidelines is offensive. It just absolutely is. So there is a piece that is almost published where I talk about the Christian right and how I follow the money of the Christian right and show how what is going on here is not, this whole idea it's unnatural, un-African, it's nonsense. The money that's coming out from that is pushed from Bible values and makes its way all the way to abstinence, to focus on the family, and that what has been called this gender ideology as well. So the biggest resistance to all of this is, so we're talking about illegal, is that the most powerful body of schools are parents, the governing body. The governing body determines what happens in schools. And as long as parents, a conservative group of parents can say there's no place for that, the school will continue. So even though you have this constitutional framework that is progressive and wonderful, at the micro level, that tension is a hard one to navigate. So, and if you chat with me, I will happily send you that article that's coming up that looks and challenges how the role, particularly in schools, that this group has had, and the power that they actually do have. And to move out of view and to make sense of all of this stuff. Let me make. So I'm give you two answers: a socially real answer, how I navigate this space myself, and then theoretical.
Yeah.
So in the book I'm arguing in this chapter, and this is going to relate to you. It's a lovely question. Is about how, and I'm just talking about how these objects are deliberately put in our path. So if you think about sexuality education, we are taught about heterosexual sex. Literatures, etc., invisibilize queer writers, etc. We don't talk about their sexuality if they're queer. But the assumption is always that these authors, these poets are all the time straight.
Yeah.
So the emphasis on keeping some objects out of you all the time, so that you don't get attracted to the notion, wow, what's that poet queer? But yeah, what a brilliant mind. So we never. Other examples are sure. And when I go to people's offices, I look at what's in the offices, etc. There's always this heterosexual performativity that happens that becomes acceptable. It becomes normative. So it's quite okay for that to happen. So think about our teachers have their children, their heterosexual partners, constantly paraded and visible for everyone entering. So as an object, it becomes an acceptable object. It's in your path, it's in your dialogue, it's acceptable. Think about the queer teachers and the trans teachers. We have to hide those aspects, so to put out to people. And that's what I'm just talking about. So that's the theoretical answer. The socially real answer is, let me give you an example of that right here, and I'll stop that example. I recently did a presentation at STEERS on metanoia. You heard of metanoia?
Yes.
So metanoia. How many people from metanoia? Welcome. Welcome. I finally meet you. This is a wonderful group. You've survived. You've survived. Congratulations. So 2020 is 2020. After a prayer session in the metanoia residence, all the doors of queer, trans, or questioning students were anointed with the cross. These guys, were you anointed? The doors. It was so huge. It was covered in all the newspapers. It was covered in marches. It was raised as a human violation. It has. After that, we had. I noticed how Orwellian this becomes. That is offense. It's in our view. But as a university, we put that out of the community. There was no feedback to the students.
Yeah.
None of the bodies, the transformation unit, the other body didn't give the students any answers. In fact, an article appeared at the beginning of this year asking, where is a response? Now, notice what we've done is we put that out of our view. As members of the staff of this university, many of us knew this. Notice how this stuff became out of the view. The compare, or the pissing incident that is happening, becomes an object that we are confronted with to take this more seriously. So notice how social identities are responded to, where they're equally unbelonging. You're made to feel unbelonging as a social identity, whatever that social identity might be. The response to the metanoia anointing still isn't engagement. Let's come back to looking even the word metanoia. Do you know what the term is? The literal translation of metanoia is?
I think it's I can't remember exactly, but it's something to do with like healing or rebirth or new beginning. Something.
I see it's on the biblical metanoia to convert and to change. So you were put to live and the oil. So hopefully that as an institution, notice how that's out of our view. It's something less important for us. Something less, we don't have to bother. But we do have queer and trans students on this campus. We experience this every day. Right?
And then actually that's this idea that people keep minimizing this relevance of the
That's right.
issues.
Yeah. And as long as that, as objects, we keep that, they become that whatever happens to them, so the bullying or whatever goes on, that can go on because they deserve that. Yeah, again, I knew you would ask me that question. I trust you to do that because I do agree that to turn in is what happens. But in writing this chapter here, I want you to go and to keep in line with the directional theme. And here I'm in another chapter where I talk about queer activism, queer and trans activism. I talk about how turning in becomes translated or can be joy, can be hope, can be liberating. And sometimes to turn in to redefine self. So this technology of self is what is needed. So in a talk like this, when you're taking something like 64,000 words and trying to put them into a lecture today, so there's some things you're not going to hit all the spots on, but I promise you I have covered it before. And it is an interesting thing because for many queer people, we've had to turn. We've had to turn to find joy and to redefine expression. I hope that at least.
Any more questions, colleagues online? We just had one comment about repeating some of the questions, which I think you did in your responses. Otherwise, no comments online. Colleagues, any other?
Oh yes, Dandile, absolutely. It means conversion. Yes, somebody online got it right. Yeah. And there's Dale and there's Kapana. So three. Let's go.
Perfect. So Dale, I saw your hand first.
Yeah, thanks so much for the wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. And this, a lot of what you spoke about, so nicely illuminated in terms of what's happening in the school, kind of reminded me of the curriculum, what's happening in the curriculum. And the disconnect, I think, that you spoke about when you asked me the first comment about legislation, where there's gender and sexuality guidelines, but then how that's not reflected in the curriculum. So, for example, research on the curriculum when, for example, sex education is spoken about, comes from the disease and danger approach. So sex and sexuality is taught in schools from an approach that conceptualizes sex and sexuality as disease-ridden and as dangerous. Now, automatically, those signifiers of disease-ridden and danger, when you put queer into that conversation, what happens? That gets attached to that kind of signifier, I guess, But I guess I wonder if you could say a little bit more about these subjectivities that emerge. And I like this idea of the turning away, turning inward, in relation to this sort of what's happening in schools and curriculum in response to this danger and disease approach to thinking about sex and sexuality.
Great. Lovely question.
The other hands here?
Thanks, Liz. Really interesting talk as usual. Yes, I was wondering if the main concepts that Sarah uses. And I wondered if in your data and the work that you've done, you've identified others, because of course those three are highlights. So just like.
Sure. And then come on.
Two quick comments. The precious story from the book, it says, show you something, and they had sex with her and really raped her, right? Which is correct. Has anything happened in that? In the book, the textbooks, or that?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then the last slide talking about implications for it. One, I must get the book, please. I don't know.
My book?
Yeah.
Oh, you can get a copy. I'll send it to you. Because I'll ask you to receive.
But how many years? I mean,
But you know there can be a swap as well.
yeah.
There can be a swap as well.
Yeah.
You can send a book over.
How do you put these objects? I mean, right now, the gender ideology, Hungary, the US, Uganda, Uganda, but also beyond it, what you're asking for, the legislation, maybe in the community, in society, the schools are used to see backlash. So how do you put these objects back into view? What do you do? Kind of, what would you do? I don't know whether it's in a book or whether it's what do you do with objects, bodies, in schools?
Lovely question. Really lovely question.
Dennis, if you could just do a short repeat of questions for.
All right, I can. So the first question was Dale's question, and where they showed danger and disease as dominant discourses within sexuality education, and then what happens when queer gets loaded or counter-normative genders and sexualities are discussed, what do they latch onto? They latch onto that same discourse, right? But here's the problem. The problem is one before that. So we'll take two quick examples of this. I'm going to show you with a curriculum like gender and sexualities, and I'm avoiding deliberate eye contact with curriculum people. So here's my thoughts. I think teaching about sexualities in school is follow the same narrative where if you smoke, these are the dangers. So if you do this, this is what's going to happen. So the missing discourses around, Michelle Fine's work around the missing discourse of desire. Firstly, that young people are legitimate sexual beings. They masturbate, they think about sex, they watch porn. The very notion of statistics tells us higher levels of pregnancy. That people are having sex, whether willingly, whether they're tricked, whether they're bewitched into doing it, but it is happening. So the idea of a focus on only that becomes a problem. And yet young people also are the vanguards of genders and sexualities. We all know in the room, if we had to look around, we all don't have sex in the same way. I mean, those who do have sex, we don't do it in the same way. I'm sure some, look that they run around with their partners with a ping pong bat, or some people use a skipping rope, or something people put coconut oil on their bodies and roll around the kitchen, or whatever kind of floats your boat is how you're going to do this stuff. But the idea is there is when you think about sexuality in your personal life, it's about pleasure and desire. But how we talk about it is about other consequences. So the one step that needs to be talking about how do we change sexuality into position, pleasure, and desire. And then introducing concepts like queer or trans have a different path. So the second one is Ahmed's. Ahmed. So for the book, I worked with two of Ahmed's work. I worked with queer phenomenology, and what I did was I took 6 months my sabbatical, and I just went and made and studied everything I could on queer phenomenology and the cultural context of emotion. And I just sat and then luckily watched Ahmed in Helsinki in a lecture, and was able to ask him the questions that I was struggling with. And so I use just two of Ahmed's concepts, the cultural politics of emotion, how certain emotions stick onto somebody. So now let's make an example. Think about how disgust and fear stick onto black men bodies. They don't stick onto white men bodies. Or everything, how disgusting. We don't think of those. We don't match those emotions in that way. So these emotions stick, they hold on to and they latch onto those bodies. So Ahmed is saying that these emotions, and then there's not an interiority to it, like the psychologists would think that there's something. It's pretty sociological that these emotions circulate and they move and they latch and they constantly vacuum of power. That even emotions like disgust, in a vacuum of power, there's a hierarchy of these emotions. And then the second one I used was on queer phenomenology. I like Ahmed because what Ahmed did for me was it freed me away. And although today's lecture is not a good way to judge that, and please don't judge this lecture, what I'm going to say. Because so much of our work has created a one-dimensional of what happens to create transformation. And pretty much this is one of the earlier chapters, so I've discussed this. But later, the book is called Queer Actors, because it shows how these very people that talk about their suffrage, really, how they resist and react and create a kind of social activism, together with queer social movements. So that's how I understood it. And sometimes I hung on to unoriginally, but I wanted to offer a different lens to look at what's happening in school. Because they've written about schooling enough, and I kind of was suddenly tired about writing. I found like I was writing the same thing. And I wanted a different, like a rose-tinted glasses. And I would give me for purple here, but it kind of, and there was the, and then the Capano's question about the pressure slide. Following the book, following that interview, I wrote articles. Got the book straight. So this book, well, at least it's a new edition. This doesn't appear. However, I'm aware of some schools that still use this book. So our distribution, like for instance in the Northern Cape, where the DOE is fairly strapped for cash, the old textbooks is still operation. So I've got to constantly be aware of where these books are, and then write and say, no, this can't happen, this can't. But it becomes work, it becomes a different kind of actors that need to challenge it. So that's the one. And then the second one is, I don't know, it's around what's going on in Uganda. Those of you who read this, it's the African continent, you see that how it reifies a kind of racist African stereotype about the space of queer and gender diverse people, and how they're not objects that are lined up. Because that's what these speculations actually pass. They say, oh, look at Uganda. But Uganda has a particular history as well. But you remember the HIV, the AIDS dilemma. Uganda was showing that they had the lowest HIV infection rates. Because at the same time, they were one of the countries that received the most amount of money from the US. Focus on family. The acid, they were the AIDS. So you didn't have to have a set of data. So look at Uganda. They have the lowest HIV infection rate. But actually go much later, you look at Tech Sweden, that was false with the trend. That data wasn't what was, Uganda had exactly the same rate of infection in Africa. But so you have this power where money has been given. If you take this money, if you teach abstinence, and if you focus on the family, or recreate the naturalness of the heterosexual family, look at Uganda as a model. I do believe what's going on in Uganda at the moment, and in this new paper, I will share it, those of you who like it, I would happily share it with this forum, that shows how this grouping has such power in this country, and still bankrolls a lot of what is happening in core gender ideology, etc. Our campus is where you see it's happening. It's socially real right here. We don't need to go to Uganda to make the argument. We just need to look at Stellenbosch University, right? And how the power of certain social groups that can determine what objects are in life.
We are out of time, but we have one comment from sort of online. Your opinion on how one can be gay when one has a disability.
You know, and Jeff is being a trickster here because Jeff is my master's student, and Jeff's work is on queer and disabilities. And I suppose Jeff's question, think about our media and our presentations of sexuality. We never see women with disabilities, men suffer on menstruation. We never see women who are with disabilities who are pregnant. And the media projects a kind of using elements of what objects. Then think about that sexuality is not an object that aligns with people with disability. And so it tells you not only that you're not a sexual being, but the fact that queer sexualities exist becomes even more class. Thank you, Jen.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everybody.